Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshack if you want to call me by my in-game name. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about my top 5 budget-based control decks. We've already covered the aggressive and the mid-range, so if you're looking for those in the description, I should have the links to those. But for those of you who are looking for some control decks that are fairly cheap on the scale of control decks, as we know, as we move across them, aggressive decks are normally a lot cheaper than control decks. So for you beginner players, you know, controller mid-range is probably where you want to sit. And then as you accumulate more dust, you can start building some of these more late game decks that normally do cost a little bit more dust. Also keep in mind that there's going to be, again, no legendaries and no epics in any of these decks. There shouldn't be any of those in any of our budget-based decks, period. But for those of you tuning in, this is your first watch in the series. Again, no legendaries, no epics, very cheap versions of the decks, very friendly to the free-to-play player and the brand new players to Hearthstone. And without further ado, let's look at the deck list. Let's talk about them, why I have what I have in here, and kind of the breakdown. So first thing is the Jade Druid. The Jade package in a nutshell is a very cheap package that you can throw into a lot of different decks, whether it's Druid, Shaman, or Rogue, and it accomplishes a lot and is able to provide you a lot of value over the course of the game. So Druid especially, because we have the Druid class has Jade Idol, which basically allows you to never fatigue because you put Jade Idols into your deck and you basically just keep drawing and you keep summoning Jades, and eventually, no matter what deck you play against, you will beat them in the late game. You will never, no deck will ever outvalue Druid in the long term because of the card Jade Idol. Druid is immune to fatigue. But the problem with this deck, you'd be like, well, Rob, if it's never going to lose in the late game, how could this deck ever be countered? The problem is this deck starts off very slow in the game, and you kind of counteract that with cards such as Wild Growth and Jade Blossom, which actually expedite your process in obtaining mana to be able to play some of your larger creatures, such as the Jade Behemoth, the Druid of the Claw, and to kind of get the Jade ball rolling. Unfortunately, Aya is not in this deck, but if you're looking at Jades as a deck that you're really interested in building, Aya Blackpaw is probably going to be, you should hone that in as your first legendary, because Aya Blackpaw not only fits in Jade Druid, but it also fits in Jade Shaman very well. So that's in regards to Jade decks, that's probably a good legendary to strive to get. Like I mentioned, this deck is very slow in the early game, looking to kind of ramp out, cheat the mana with Wild Growths, Innervates, Jade Blossoms. From there, you know, you hop into your Jade bandwagon, you play as many Jades as basically you can every turn, make trades, stay alive, and then at the end of the game, you'll basically be able to swarm your opponent within basically a Jade army due to the fact that Jade Idol is a card in this game. And for those of you unfamiliar with Jade Idol, it basically says for 1 mana you can either summon a Jade or you can reshuffle 3 copies of this in your deck. So normally for the first Jade Idol, it's okay to just make the Jade, but then when you get to your second Jade Idol, you shuffle it into your deck, you draw into 1, you play 2 more Jade Idols, then you shuffle the 3rd one again back in your deck, making 3 more Jade Idols, and in combination with Gadgets and Auctioneer, you can draw an enormous amount of cards and summon a crazy amount of Jades in one turn, especially if you combo Auctioneer with Innervate and Jade Idol. I mean, golly gee gosh, you're looking like a pretty sweet turn there. So with that, it basically follows the same trend as Jade Shaman, but I think a little bit slower. So you give up. Jade Shaman is probably faster, but doesn't have the late game. Jade Druid is a little bit slower, but has that super late game. So you can kind of, you know, based on what you want, considering this is in the control deck and a Shaman Jade was more in the mid-range deck. Our next one's going to be the Cthulhu Mage. Keep in mind that most of the decks, I'm pretty sure all of the decks that we're going to cover from now until the end of this video are going to be revolving around Cthulhu. Not Cthulhu is the most broken endgame mechanic in the game. It's just the fact that it's very, very easy for newer players to understand the Cthulhu mechanic and also obtain the Cthulhu cards, because the first Old Gods pack that you receive and or buy, you automatically unlock yourself Cthulhu, which is a legendary, but I don't really consider that having to like get him through dust or gold, because the game actually gives him to you for free. And he is I guess one of the, well, I would consider him one of the best free-to-play, budget-based player, control deck kind of archetypes to build, due to the fact that he wins games on his own, and the whole deck leads up to you playing this giant minion that just destroys your opponent. I mean, you can't get any more late game than that. Plus, again, very cheap to build these decks in regards to being able to, again, be able to obtain Cthulhu for free as long as you get 1 Old Gods pack. So we'll cover the deck. Again, the deck starts off very quickly with cards with Mana Worm, Beckoner of Evil, Cult Sorcerer, and Sorcerer's Apprentice. Very similar to our Elemental Mage, right? With that start there. It still has the same spells with Frost Bolts and Fireballs and Fire Lance Portal. Even fits in the Flame Strike. But instead of that mid to late game being the Twilight Summoner and Water... Oh, actually, Water Elemental isn't here. But instead of like the... that mid game that we would have in the elemental deck with the elementals, like the Servant and the one that conjures up the 2 mana, deal 2 damage, summon another elemental. Those two guys. We're going to be running Cthulhu buffers like the Cthulhu's Chosen and of course the Twilight Elder. So beginning of the game, very aggressive minions, a lot of value with the Cult Sorcerer, buffing up your Cthulhu. Middle of the game, Faceless Summoner, Firelance Portal, keeping the value rolling. Chinking down your opponent's health, getting them to like that 15 mark, and then from there your Cthulhu should be 15 plus due to the fact that so many cards in your deck synergize well with Cthulhu, and then you go ahead and finish your opponent. We actually just made the deck guide on our legendary Cthulhu Druid deck testing, or our deck guide I should say. Very cool deck. I don't want to say it's the exact same as this, but the foundation is there. Chipping away at your opponent's health, playing a big Cthulhu, whether you can defeat them with just the burst in the deck with Fireballs and Firelance Portals, or you use Cthulhu himself, either or. This deck can basically you can win with this deck using Cthulhu or not, which is really cool, because a lot of the decks with like 1-win condition, like N'Zoth, if your opponent can Dirty Rat the N'Zoth out, or your N'Zoth gets kind of like Twisting Nethered or something, the game is mostly lost because your end game is dependent on that one card. While Cthulhu, especially in Mage, the Mage has a lot of mechanics that allow you to overcome even if your Cthulhu does not get its max value. So moving on to Warrior, this is definitely one deck that requires your Cthulhu to be able to live unless you plan on fatiguing your opponent out, which is, again, it's a Warrior, it's a very real thing. Unfortunately, the problem with Cthulhu Warrior versus Quest Warrior is Quest Warrior has repetitive value every single turn when they complete their quest. Meanwhile, the Cthulhu Warrior has its kind of core value set on that one turn you summon Cthulhu. Maybe you get to Doomcaller, you make another Cthulhu, and your second Cthulhu is even bigger. But by that time, maybe it's too late, maybe it's not, but I would have to say if you're looking to build like a Cthulhu Warrior and or a Quest Warrior is better, but again, Quest Warrior is a lot more expensive than this Cthulhu Warrior deck, like a lot more expensive. You need the quest, you know, you need all those Drakes, and those are epics, and then you need double Brawl and all this stuff. So again, looking at this at a budget standpoint, you know, even looking around ranks 15, 10 to 5, you know, Cthulhu Warrior will be able to take you there. We were actually grinding with Cthulhu Warrior last month quite successfully, and it was a fun deck to play along with, catching people by surprise. So again, the deck has the core Cthulhu package with Beckoner of Evil, the Twilight Elder, the Cthulhu's Chosen, but instead of the Mage class having spells, the Warrior class of course has weapons to be able to deal with minions, and because Warrior doesn't have healing, we actually have armor. We can afford to take that damage to the face with attacking minions with our weapons and stuff like that. So kind of the game plan of the Cthulhu getting buffed and being summoned is the same. Meanwhile, all the other mechanics in the deck in regards to how you deal with minions and how you kind of navigate through the early and mid game are very, very different between the Mage Cthulhu and the Warrior Cthulhu. So I would definitely recommend trying both of these decks. I prefer the Warrior Cthulhu over anything because I just really enjoy the Warrior class. I like the whole control mentality of being able to kind of choose and pick which cards I want to live, what I want to die. Like, let's say you don't want to do anything this turn and you just feel like, you know, tank up and chill. You can do that with a Warrior because you have the ability to kind of continuously game armor and drive those games out to be extremely long and to make it to the late game, which allows you or your opponent to make more mistakes than you. That's why I liked Control Warriors so much back in the day, is because after like turn 10 or 12, a lot of opponents will actually get fatigued and they'll start making misplays, and that's where you can really capitalize. Not that your deck is exceedingly strong, it's just that your opponent, you know, they make one miss up or one misslip one turn, and all of a sudden you pounce on that opportunity and you're then on the driver's seat. And those are the games I really enjoy, is where both players are at the top of their game and you're just kind of waiting for the other player to make that one slip up. You grab the opportunity and you step on the gas. Those are my favorite kind of decks. I'm misclicking all over the place here. So looking at Priest, again, another Cthulhu deck. I would say that this deck, out of all the Cthulhu decks, may in fact be the weakest due to the fact that you don't have some obscure way to burst your opponent out. Like the Mage has Fireballs, Firelands, Portals, Frostbolts, plus Cthulhu, plus decent minions, while the Warrior has the ability, you know, tank up, single target removal, taunts, weapons, and the ability to kind of really drive out the late game. Priest, on the other hand, while it doesn't have any of this, it has a lot of decent field clear in regards to like Holy Nova, Alchemy Soul Priest, Circle of Healing. It's got Injured Blade Master, Northshire Cleric, Circle of Healing for a ton of draw, really good early game. So it kind of just depends what you're going for, but out of all of the decks, like I mentioned, the Priest is probably the most control-y, but at the same time, it does the least. Which doesn't really make much sense, but there is a combination of cards you can use. You can go like Soul Priest, Alchemist to deal 5 damage with its Battle Cry instead of heal 5. You know, you've got tons of healing with the Twilight Darkmender. So if you're finding yourself facing a lot of aggressive base classes and the Mage not being able to basically sustain itself because it has no healing or no taunts, and you just don't like Warrior, or the Warrior again is too slow, the Priest, not that it again has this huge like win condition besides Cthulhu, but it's actually able to just outvalue your opponent, and they'll end up just conceding because they just can't kill you. You're sitting there at 20 to 30 health the entire game. You just keep summoning decently sized minions, and eventually when your Cthulhu does come out, it's gonna kill them. And if it doesn't kill them and it dies, you just Doomcaller, put the Cthulhu back, and you still have more time because again, you can just continuously heal yourself. So while you give up, you know, the burst potential or the fatigue potential like the Warrior, you do gain that and like the healing and to be able to basically just sustain yourself with your hero power and the cards like the Twilight Darkmender. So very 3 different huge takes on different Cthulhu decks. And then we have the Cthulhu Druid, which is, I want to say, a mix between the Warrior and the Mage, if anything, because you could be like, Druid doesn't have burst, how is it like a Mage? It actually does. Feral Rage and swipes. You know, you go double Feral Rage swipe and all of a sudden you're pushing 12 damage with just spells in hand. And then you could be like, well, how is it like the Warrior? It's like the Warrior because you have that armor ability with the Feral Rages. Well, you also have a decent amount of, I don't want to say a decent amount of taunts, but you have good taunts in the deck like Dark Arakoa and the Druid of the Claw. And then on top of that, you're kind of able to make it towards the late game. Because the Dark Arakoa actually gives your Cthulhu the +3/+3 instead of normally a +2/+2, and this kind of allows your Cthulhu in this particular Druid deck to be bigger than if you were playing it in a Warrior deck. So what you give up for the weapons, you actually gain in buffing your Cthulhu, if that makes sense. So I would definitely rate the Druid Cthulhu deck very high in regards to being able to pull out some sweet victories and being able to get some huge Cthulhus. On top of that, if you're looking for, if you really enjoy Cthulhu and you want to know what your first legendary you should craft is, Twin Emperor Veclor fits into every single Cthulhu deck. It's definitely a staple. Again, it's a legendary, so I didn't include it in these lists. So it kind of depends what kind of late game you're going for. If you're going for Jades, Aya Blackpaw, first legendary. If you're going for Cthulhu, go Twin Emperor Veclor. Can't go wrong there. It fits into every deck. And when you're crafting your legendaries, guys, I know this doesn't really cover the deck or what we're supposed to be doing here, but I know I'm going to get questions regarding, you know, I have this deck. What is the first legendary I should craft? Kind of figure out what legendaries fit in most of the decks you're wanting to build. So if you say, I really like Cthulhu, Twin Veclor. You really like Jade, Aya Blackpaw. You really like dragons, Ysera. So kind of just go with what you like and then look for a card that fits in a lot of those decks, and you'll be good to go in regards to being able to make multiple different decks, but use some of the same cards and the same foundation, if that makes sense. So with that, that's going to wrap up our control deck budget video. If you have any feedback or suggestions or anything I might have missed out on, feel free to leave those in the comment section below. For those individuals looking for a little bit more insight, the comment section on most of these videos is really good in regards to people communicating with one another and kind of adding on to what I've said, because of course I can't cover every single thing I want to in a video, but I like to cover as much as I can as quick as possible. So with that, thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Of course, I'm Warshack, and happy whatever the hell day it is.